Cold War. There was no Russia, no Kazakhstan, no Ukraine, just the Soviet Union, the USSR. Mikhail Gorbachev was the General Secretary of the Communist Party, you may recall. And he was also the president of the USSR. You may recall, too, that 5 years before that, the United States had boycotted the 1980 Olympic Games in Moscow to protest the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. These were the times that I was at that basketball game. And while I was in Germany, I remember I would take a train once a week from Göttingen to Kassel. And you would see this, if you looked at a map from 1985 in West Germany, you would see that the rail line passed right along the East-West German border. And as a young man, I grew up in extreme rural southern Utah. At least that's how I like to refer to it. So I was fascinated by almost everything I saw in Germany, but in particular, I was fascinated by the border between East and West Germany. Winston Churchill called it the Iron Curtain, and now I could see why. In fact, you may know that Winston Churchill coined that phrase, the Iron Curtain, right here in Missouri, at a speech he gave in Westminster College in Fulton, Missouri. And there's a museum there, you can go learn more about Winston Churchill and his speech. For several miles, the West German Railway comes between 50 and 100 meters of the Iron Wall. It is a tight mesh fence, at least 10 meters high, with razor wire at the top, and these strange squares that made a zigzag pattern up and down the length of the fence for as far as you could see. There was a second fence that ran perpendicular to the exterior fence that was made of rolled up barbed wire. And there were roads and a little bit of traffic going on in the border area. And you could see up into the towers. There were towers placed along the border. There were armed soldiers in those towers. That's all we could see from the train as I passed it once a week. But I was curious, I wanted to know more, so I did a little bit of research. And I found out what those patterns were, those dark squares making the zigzag formation along the fence. They were automatic machine guns. And they were designed to be triggered by anyone approaching the fence from the inside of East Germany. And they would turn from left to right and shoot that pattern, a phalanx of bullets that would kill anybody who had made it past all the other defenses to that point. And I also learned that in the space between the two fences, there were landmines. The politics of this wall should have made this very clear, but if they didn't, these brutal implements did. This wall was not intended to keep people out. It was intended to keep people in. And it was with this in my mind that I rose to sing the national anthem, the Star-Spangled Banner, which you're all going to get to sing in a little bit. That my heart swelled with pride, remembering what it's like to be free and seeing my friends behind that wall. I particularly became overwhelmed when we got to the part of the Star-Spangled Banner that says, "For the land of the free and the home of the brave." Because freedom meant something else to me now. Now that I had seen that wall, it meant it's something entirely different. And just like you have surmounted the same kinds of barriers, you probably, many of you, crossed your own walls and fences and borders to get here today. And you need to share that unique perspective on freedom that I now had and have with everyone you meet. We need that perspective. Yes, I am a proud American. Just a few years after my experience in Germany, I got to go back to Europe. This time I was on study abroad. I was in the town of Baden by Wien, which is a suburb of Vienna. And I had chosen that location because I was engaged to an Austrian citizen. And we basically were engaged while I was there on study abroad. The students who were there, and there were only about 30 or 40 of us, got to pick from several trips that were made available to us during the 6-month period we were there on study abroad. They were to Egypt and Israel, expensive trips from Vienna, or to Moscow in January. That was cheaper, I picked that one. So we stayed while we were when we were in Moscow, we stayed at the Cosmos Hotel, which was built for the 1980 Olympics, ironically. It was intended to impress the world and its athletes with its modern amenities and style, and impress it did. And it even had a bowling alley there for guest use. You don't get that at a Motel 6. During our week-long stay, we visited many historic sites. We got to see the Bolshoi Ballet perform. We visited the top museums, including the Kremlin, and we got to shop. Now, shopping in Moscow in 1987 was not at all like it is today. We ducked into one grocery. The only produce they had were rutabagas and potatoes and turnips, I think. It was really sparse and shocking. And soon after that, we went to this gigantic bookstore in downtown Moscow, bigger than any Barnes & Noble I've ever seen, of course. Barnes & Noble didn't exist at the time. In any case, I found this picture book of Moscow on the shelves, and I decided I would buy this as a souvenir. So I walked up to the cashier, and when I got to the cashier, I noticed the familiar icons or logos for Visa and MasterCard. I was like, here we are in communist Russia, and they're accepting Western bank financed credit cards. I thought that was odd, and I thought I would give it a try. So I gave them my credit card to pay for this book. Looks like it was 5 rubles, 5.10 rubles, which may have been a lot of money at the time, I have no idea. And I will never forget what happened after that. All of the employees from this gigantic store gathered around the cashier to watch her process what I think was probably the very first credit card that ever had been produced for women at that store, because they had to learn what to do. Of course, there was no swiping or internet at that time. That was back in the olden days when you had to use a device to actually physically rub the numbers onto a piece of paper. Anyway, it exposed to me an isolation of an entire people that until that moment had been hidden from my view. The bare shelves were just a sign of some of the meager products that were available in Soviet Russia. Certain products were hard to get, and we knew that when we left. Before we came to Moscow, we decided to gather up basketball shoes and jeans and other things we knew that would be valuable on the black market in Moscow. And of course, since this was still communist Russia, we were concerned about the KGB. We thought if we actually did engage in any kind of trade, we could be caught and sent to the Gulag for life. At least that's what we thought. Nonetheless, one of our fellow students decided to venture out into the vast park that was just across the entrance to the Hotel Cosmos. And we just thought, if she never comes back, then we'll know that she got caught by the KGB. Luckily, she returned with reports of lots of black market activity, deals going down in the park, and no sign of the authorities. So we all then decided to take our basketball shoes and Levi jeans into the park to try and score some Soviet memorabilia. I found a man who was willing to trade me an army cap like the soldiers guarding Lenin's tomb would wear. It was gray with this big golden emblazoned insignia on his cap. It was gorgeous. And this Russian army belt with a brass buckle with the Soviet star on it and the hammer and sickle. This is the actual belt. I was thrilled with that, and he also threw in a rabbit hat, a fur rabbit hat for the winter. And in return, I gave him my used Adidas basketball shoes and a pair of Levi jeans. And we all then scrambled back to our hotel, lucky that nothing had happened to us. I'm sure had our professors known what we were doing, they would have stopped us. Because it was risky, and certainly we probably wouldn't have been sent to the Gulag had we been caught, but I think we would have been detained and harassed for sure. The danger, though, wasn't over. It's not like we had escaped the worst of it. We knew that you were prohibited, because we had been briefed when we entered the country, that you were prohibited from bringing certain items out of the Soviet Union. And so we were all standing in line at the airport, getting ready to go back home to Vienna. And we had to go through an exiting security check. And we were congratulating ourselves on how well we had hidden our contraband in our luggage. So for example, I took this brass buckle off the belt and put it in the back of my 35mm camera, one of those old clunky metal cameras with a regular lens on it, thinking that if it goes through the X-ray machine, they'll just see a big hunk of metal and they won't notice the belt buckle. And then I took the belt itself and I threaded it into the edge of the luggage. It happened to match, this inside color of the belt happened to match the color of the lining of the luggage. I was so proud of myself for having thought of this. And we were all sharing similar conversations, talking about, how well we knew we would make it through security when we noticed two British, probably tourists, in front of us who had just crossed the line and were being inspected by two Russian officers or two Soviet officers. And those officers had emptied their entire luggage onto a table, had sliced open the lining of their luggage to see if anything was hidden in there, and were going through every item of clothing with their thumbs and fingers to see if anything had been sewn into the shirts or jackets or sweaters that were in their luggage. And they actually took the two guys eventually into another room. And at that time, when you saw Soviet authorities take you into a back room, you thought they would never be seen again. I'm sure they were fine, but we legitimately were worried that that could happen to us and we would never be seen again. Anyway, it was our turn. There were maybe, like I said, 30 of us or so in line, and our professor was at the front of the line. And the officer, the inspecting officer, looked at our professor and said, we all have boots in our shoes, by the way, except our professor. So he looked at our professor and he said, do you have any rules in your shoes? A very common problem with people leaving the country. And he honestly answered no. So the security officer, seeing that we were all together as a group, just waved us all past, like, okay, great, come on in. Oh, we were so lucky that day. But we saw what could happen had we not been so lucky. When we deplaned the airport in Vienna, I remember the starkness of the color, the brightness, the advertisements and commercialism really drew a stark contrast to the gray drabness of Soviet Russia. We walked by multiple grocery stores to get to our bus that day at the end of our trip, and they were teeming with Western goods, overflowing with produce from everywhere in the world, and the pastries. They looked delicious. I am a proud American. I am proud that I live in a land where they don't care what you're bringing out of the country, they care what you're bringing into it. I am proud to live in a country whose political and economic system, despite all of its flaws, provides most of us with an embarrassment of riches compared to others. Now, right after I returned from study abroad, President Ronald Reagan gave his famous speech at the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin, saying to the Soviet leader, Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And then he later in the same speech said, as I looked out a moment ago from the Reichstag, that embodiment of German unity, I noticed words crudely spray painted upon the wall. The Berlin Wall is what he was referring to. Perhaps spray painted by a young Berliner. The word said, this wall will fall, for it cannot withstand faith, it cannot withstand truth. And these are now Reagan's words. The wall cannot withstand freedom. 2 weeks after this famous speech, I got married to that Austrian. I wasn't an immigration lawyer at the time. I wasn't even a lawyer. So I had to figure things out on my own, just like all of you did. She came as a fiance, and I applied for that visa when we were in Austria. And I remember running around the streets of Vienna trying to get her medical exam done hours before the very last moment where it could have been done. And then when she got here, of course, she had to adjust her status. And then she eventually became a citizen through a ceremony like you're participating in today. So I've been through and seen what you have seen. The waiting, the endless paperwork, the fees, which have gone up quite a bit since then, the uncertainty and worry. I know what it was like for many of you to get to this point. You had to earn your citizenship, and it will mean far more to you as a result. Be glad that such a valuable gift was not just handed to you like it was to me and others in this room. Your effort made you strong, and you can be proud of that. It was not but 2 years later that the Berlin Wall finally came down. You probably remember where you were when you saw the images of it happening. I do. I was at home taking care of my 1-year-old son and getting ready for law school. It was November 9th, 1989, and a representative of the German Democratic Party had announced earlier that day that citizens of the German Democratic Republic were free to cross their own country's border for the first time in decades. And as a result, more than 2 million people from East Berlin came to West Berlin that weekend. And they joined in what one observer called the greatest street party in the history of the world. Soon the wall was gone, and Germany and Berlin were united for the first time since 1945. I am a proud American. Proud to be where that bright light shines as a beacon to the East Germans and other people like you. Gathered here today, some of you who were willing, like the East Germans, to risk everything to seek a better life, a richer freedom, and endless opportunity. The first time I was old enough to vote. You all know what age that is now, don't you? Because it was one of your questions. What is it? 18. I was 18. I voted for Ronald Reagan. And I really didn't have a party. It wasn't a political decision. I treated the election more or less like other votes that I had cast up to that point in my life, like for class president and homecoming queen. It was a popularity contest. And Ronald Reagan was, if nothing else, popular. But the only reason I'm telling you this is because I think Ronald Reagan was the last president to really champion immigrant rights. That's my opinion. But I have represented clients who benefited from his 1986 amnesty law. Only a Republican president, and really only someone as popular as Ronald Reagan, could have pulled that off. Nevertheless, I'm mentioning this in particular to you because it's an example of how our system of government can work, even if it seems endlessly broken at the moment. During his farewell address to the nation, and each of our presidents gives a farewell address at the end of their term, started as a tradition from George Washington, and I commend in particular to you the farewell address of President Barack Obama. Ronald Reagan used his last words in office, his last words in his last speech, literally the last paragraph of his speech, to talk about how we should welcome immigrants to this country. And when you hear his words, because I'm going to read them to you, they're brief, you will think he was raised from the dead yesterday and is speaking to us about current events. He spoke to us from the Oval Office in the White House. And here's what he said. And that's about all I have to say tonight, except for one thing. The past few days, when I've been at that window upstairs in the White House, I've thought a bit of the shining city upon a hill. The phrase comes from John Winthrop, who wrote it to describe the America he imagined. What he imagined was important because he was an early pilgrim, an early freedom man. He journeyed here on what today we would call a little wooden boat. And like other pilgrims, like some of you, he was looking for a home that would be free. And Ronald Reagan continued, I've spoken of the shining city all my political life, but I don't know if I ever quite communicated what I saw when I said it. But in my mind, it was a tall, proud city, built on rocks stronger than oceans, wind-swept, God-blessed, and teeming with people of all kinds living in harmony and peace. A city with free ports that hummed with commerce and creativity. And if there had to be city walls, those walls had doors. And the doors were open to anyone with the will and the heart to get here. And she's still a beacon, he continued, still a magnet for all who must have freedom, for all the pilgrims, from all the lost places who are hurtling through the darkness toward home. Yeah, I'm a proud American, proud of the sacrifices you all made to get here. I'm proud that our laws allow you to become U.S. citizens yourself, and I will be proud to stand next to you in the voting booth very soon. Welcome to the shining city upon a hill, America. And now it's up to you, all of you, to keep that light shining bright for all who still seek it.